Hey, Chris Liepe here with Matt Heafy, Trivium, incredible vocalist, great screaming, great singing, fantastic production. There's lots going on here. And quite honestly, I've put off doing a video on Matt for quite some time, even though lots of you have been asking, because Matt himself has a lot to say about how to sing and produce like Matt Heafy and Trivium. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel. I'm sure, since most of you have requested it, you already know about it, but if you haven't, check out Matt's YouTube channel. It's amazing. And one video that Matt did that really stood out to me was on Loudwire. It's called How I Learned to Scream. And I watched this video and he was talking about how, it wasn't diet, it wasn't ultimately, acid reflux or whatever, why I had problems with my voice when I was screaming. I'm paraphrasing like crazy here. But in the end, he said it was really all about technique. It was all about getting the technique down. That's the thing that helped him go after it for the long haul and be able to do things live and not completely break down in the studio. So keep that in mind. I think it's valuable to be looking at your whole life. If you are eating a bowl of salsa every night before bed and then want to get up and sing and scream in the morning, you're probably not going to, there's sleep, there's diet, those things are going to mess with you. But if you have dialed in technique, you're going to be able to tell the difference between physical abuse you're giving your body when you're singing or screaming and physical abuse you're giving your body that has nothing to do with your vocal technique, but that is going to mess up your vocal technique because you're not taking care of yourself. There's those two lines to walk. But I thought it was really cool to hear Matt talk about that it really was getting the technique down. So without further delay, let's discuss Matt's technique. And I will probably be wrong on some of this, but it doesn't really matter if I'm wrong. I hope Matt corrects me. The main thing is that you're watching along with me, you're trying things along with me, you're putting things in your own voice and seeing what happens based on what we glean from Matt's approach. And this is how I teach all the time. It's about being inspired, not by imitating. There are lots of videos that I do on the channel with different artists where I do this kind of thing. And if you'd like to go deeper with me in one of my courses, click the link below and join my free voice course. That's the best place to start, and I'll help you dial in the fundamentals necessary to do some of what Matt's doing. All right, let's go. First off, I've got this little spoken piece from Matt that was from a making of video I found, and I wanted to make some observations about his speaking voice versus his singing voice. So listen carefully here.
Knowing that you can do anything definitely pulls a big weight off the shoulders, but having experimented and seeing what the limits of your band are.
Limits of your band are. I mean, there's no singing here, of course, but notice how low are. I mean, he's bright.
Seeing what the limits of your band are. You
are. But the pitch of his speech is low. He's got a low voice. He's got a beefy voice, even though he has a bright disposition and placement.
When it's appropriate to go to 100, you know when it's appropriate to go to 10, and you know when and why you do different things.
Yeah. So that's going to inform all sorts of things with his voice, and I think it's helpful sometimes to hear people speak, especially when their voices are drastically different from their singing or some of the things they do when they're singing. Okay, keep that in mind. Next.
It's easy to be right when everything repeats.
Now, this particular sample, notice how the time is really loose, and then we've got this almost spoken ending of the phrase.
Everything repeats.
Everything repeats. Everything repeats. And there's this sense that he's not, he's with the music, obviously.
It's easy to be right when
but he's ahead, he's like pulling the snare towards him. The snare is far behind where that right. And initially you might think, especially when it's out of context like this, like, why didn't he re-sing that? That sounds out of time. But when you listen to this song in context, it actually works really well. He's pulling time with his voice in a way that fits better than if he's really dead on. He does this very well. This is something that soul singers, blues singers, those kind of guys do a ton. And it creates a lot more interest and realism out of the vocal performance. And combine that with the speech level exit on this line, And you've got interest in what could otherwise be a pretty boring and non-engaging line. And it's worth noting that a lot of Matt's clean and melodic stuff is not that rangy, but his delivery, he's always got a little bit of a different character in his delivery. And that's what makes things so interesting. You don't have to have a huge singing range to be interesting in the way you deliver melodies, especially if you are able to harness compression, grit, and screaming, as we'll get into more in a little bit.
It's easy to be right when everything repeats.
It's easy to be right when everything repeats. That idea of clumping words together and almost ignoring the timing. Next.
To rip the heart from your head.
Okay, he's adding some compression here.
To rip the heart from your head.
Notice how he doesn't... This is heart.
To rip the heart from...
To rip the heart from your...
To rip the heart from your hate.
Your hate. Listen to hate.
Your hate.
Hate. That isn't hate. It's also not hate. He closes that one really well.
To rip the heart from your hate.
And then we've got the group of him and maybe some bandmates yelling hate at the end. He's placing his compression slightly lower than some, and even lower than some of the other samples we'll listen to here. But it's worth dialing this in to get a basis for how he controls his air and gets his grit.
To rip the heart from your hate.
Let's start there. To rip the heart. No. Let's lower our larynx. And then let's imitate an old man. Goes extreme. To rip the heart from your... Like that. To rip the heart. Then we're going to raise that old man sensation up a little bit as we hold back more air, lifting something heavy. To. And then right as we start to break up, we want to feel that out. Because he's not all out broken up here.
To rip the heart from your hate.
Until he gets to hate. Hate, right? To rip the heart from your hate. Notice how I'm getting progressively grittier as I go on. I'm progressively moving the compression up and holding back more air. It's a support airflow balance that's helping me walk this line of clean, almost dirty compression to then going full into the hate at the end. Yes. Amazing scream and another often misunderstood, misdiagnosed technique here. This is not fry screaming. This is extreme pitch singing with lots and lots of false chord engagement, singing with distortion. But we have removed the focus from our primary chords. If you listen to this again, there is pitch. Even though the pitch is not the focus and the pitch is not really the pursuit, there is primary chord engagement there, and it's creating a texture that you can't get with a normally defined as fry scream. So keep that in mind here, and let's dissect it. We're going to assign pitch to this as we hear it. I hear it as in waves. Okay? And then we want to imitate his vowels. Very open right there. Why? Not waves. Waves. And then on this second one. In waves. So we've got in waves. In waves. Right? Here's where it gets really fun. We are going to, with each of these pitches, we're going to find out how we can break on those pitches. In. I am leaning into my vocal break as I place the resonance back. So I'm no longer thinking about forward placement. In waves. That's a belt. I'm going to go back. In waves. Okay, now what I've done is I've combined this idea of long, low larynx, certain mouth posture, tongue posture with this idea that I'm letting my voice break, crack, fall apart right around those notes. If you need help moving your vocal break around, I've worked with a lot of students helping them discover that your break is in fact not just one area of your voice. You can break anywhere. And if you can figure out how to do that, you can lean into this, adding the right amount of compression, and get the screams. So if we're going to assign these pitches and then let each pitch fall apart instantly, first I'm going to do it not instantly and let you hear how you kind of can crack into things. I bet you've done stuff like that by accident when you're not warmed up. It's about learning how to push a little harder and place that grit, place that compression really high in your throat as you're moving your resonance back and lengthening and opening up your vocal tract and mouth. Now, you notice when I said that second in, there was a little crack there. This is so normal. And if I were to delete those, like, oh, I screwed that scream up, I better redo, you wouldn't see the reality of dialing in your screams. Also, so in addition to not being afraid of voice cracks while you're dialing these things in, listen to some of your favorite artists. You will hear these little cracks. It's part of vulnerability. The best screaming is born out of vulnerability, not this like macho masculinity thing. It may sound somewhat like that in the end, but we have to approach it from vulnerability, and our vocal break is the most vulnerable. And as we continue to bring our resonance back, or think about it being resonating further back toward our soft palate as we're doing all these other things, we can continue to remove the pitch. And we'll see in other examples as I go on here with Matt that sometimes this pitch basis is more prominent and sometimes it's not. And he's got a really great control over that. In waves! You hear more pitch, and then in waves! As I bring the resonance back and open things up and accentuate that false chord engagement, it's a feel thing. You're able to hear the pitch and sense the pitch less and less. Okay, moving on. I like this because we've got the clean singing here, and then we've got the with me in background. But listen to his pulling everyone down. That's very different than the other more lengthy tonality we heard earlier. Different albums, different songs. But again, he's very good at blending with different characters himself, blending with different characters as he produces these vocals. Pulling everyone down. And I like the contrast that he's created here because we have pulling everyone down, brighter, getting his face out of the way. This isn't pulling everyone down because we've got part of that character in the background. Pulling everyone down. Pulling everyone down. We've got that guy in the background with that super low posture. And he needed to be brighter here so that they didn't blend together too much. They're dancing with each other. They're not walking on each other. This negativity's leeching. Any shred of composure. I like how here, and this is one thing I've always liked about Matt's voice, is that he goes for feel rather than perfection. I hardly ever hear anything, I don't know if I've really ever heard anything where I'm like, oh yeah, that's so obviously pitch corrected. I mean, these pitches aren't perfect, and that's actually better than perfect. This negativity's leeching. This negativity's leeching. But notice how leeching is technically sharp. Ching. But listen to the character again. He's longer. He's doubling himself here. Listen here. Pulling pulling everyone down. And it's almost like this croony sort of thing. And then this negativity, much more bodybuilder-ish here, as opposed to like swooner or whatever. The point I'm trying to make is that there's not a pursuit of perfection or accuracy here at all, and it makes the line and songs better.
This negativity's leeching, and he's right off composure.
Right off. This negativity's leeching. I could do all sorts of this negativity's leeching. That would be more like the last character that he did in that last sample. Chameleon singer here. The way this is produced and the tonality that's being used in the vocals, it sounds a little bit like Alice in Chains, the Lane Staley vibe here. For dead. This is back to that brighter sounding character. Those lighter harmonies in back, really neat. And the way he kind of swells into these notes, and they're held out. It's a slower melody with more rhythmic complexities in the band. It's a nice combination. For dead. Smooth vibrato. Okay, listen very carefully behind the screams. There's this layer, this aura of other very quiet, partially sung, partially spoken vocals over his scream, or way underneath his screaming. Then it was nothing. That's back there. It creates this illusion of a single voice because they're so far back, and the effects that they've used on the main vocals are widening sort of around and shrouding those other vocals. Listen one more time. I didn't hear it until I, got my headphones on and started making this video. I had never listened that intently to hear those things. But this scream is very similar to what he was doing earlier. Because there's other pitches back there, we don't sense the pitch basis of this scream as much. Nothing is where I'd pitch that. Nothing. It was all a blur and then it was nothing. Is probably what I would do. And those pitches are atonal to what's going on in the music, and they're removed enough by placing the resonance back that you get that long, pitchless impression from the scream. He's got that really long posture, open throat. That's another thing about screaming. You'd think that, well, how can you possibly close your throat off and have an open throat when you scream? Well, it's because of false chord engagement. You can be very open and have your point of resistance as your false chords, and you're not even experiencing any ancillary tension. You can actually be intense and relaxed at the same time while you're doing some of these things. It was all a blur and then it was nothing. It was all a blur and then it was nothing. Yeah! Ugh, it can be really blood-curdling. Removing that note by placing the resonance back. But even as I'm doing that, I don't feel like I am, even though my face is turning red and you might see veins in my neck, there's not a sense that this intensity is competing with the sound. When you watch anybody scream, if they're doing it like this, you see the mouth open, the eyes are wide or whatever, and there's intensity there. That's not tension. If you had tension, competitive tension, you wouldn't be able to do this at all. It doesn't work. I just love the tone here with those higher background vocals and until the world. So forward and bellish and bright. And I love how he closes. Goes, listen. Notice how he leaves cold open, but goes. It takes you on this little tonal arc. It could be very easy to just sing this like this. Until the world goes cold. And leave the resonance static. But he's subtly moving it around. And it's way more interesting. Great singers know how to dynamically move around their resonance instead of just having or pursuing the best tone. Their best tone comes as a result of many different tonalities pulled out of their voice. Until the, if I exaggerate, it's a little bit more nasal. Until the world, and then world is forward and belted and less nasal. Goes. So the beginning of goes is not in the nose, and then the end of it, we've thrown our resonance through our nasal cavity. Goes cold. And then we've let that cold, that same vowel that's at the beginning of go, we've let that be forward and belty until we slide out of it. Cold. Keep these resonance shifts in mind. It's not all about just being the best screamer or hitting a certain note. These subtle resonance shifts are what make great vocalists great and what makes them interesting. I like this scream because you hear some of that vulnerability I was talking about earlier. Listen again. On deserve, listen. There's a little crack in there if you listen really carefully. And also notice on what. Listen to what. What yo? The pitch basis is very, very strong there. It's like he's yelling high. You get what yo? I'm really exaggerating that, right? But then he goes back into that deserved, and as he's going into deserved again, he's removing that pitch basis, and there's a little crack. Deserved! You almost can't make it happen. You kind of have to let it happen. But it's a really cool sound. What you deserved! What you deserved! Experiment with those extremes. Here it is again. I just want to point these out because we don't hear them unless they're pointed out a lot of the time. Listen to the. This is doubled and it's panned a little bit. There's a little squeak, and it's not bad. It sounds great. If you try to get rid of those qualities in your voice too much, it becomes a very static, boring, uninspired sound. But I love how he enters here. He does a very good job of entering his screams. It's almost like we're going at the very beginning. Like you're vomiting. This creates a more robust entrance. And it's something that I've been working on, especially since studying guys like Matt. This is a great example of that pitch basis being very forward, but it's still very aggressive. Denial, holding on. Denial, holding on. Denial. And he's a little longer here. This is not the Lane Staley posture as much. Denial. Although I do hear a guy in the back. Denial, holding on. The double may be a little bit different of a character. Denial, holding on. Holding on. Holding. Lots of compression. We are not letting our voice break here, though. We're not going, denial, holding on. denial, holding on. That's a good sound, but this is more just lifting, denial, holding on, with a nice open throat and a long posture again. Lower larynx, not denial, holding on, but denial, holding on. And it helps me when I'm dialing this stuff in to think about lifting my desk. Denial, lifting my desk. Will be the eternal presence. And I love how we go from this pitch singing with distortion will be the eternal presence to abandoning into this scream. But if you listen carefully, it's just different pitches and different levels of false chord engagement. Will be the eternal presence. Will be the eternal presence is how I could think about the pitches, even with a little bit of screaming in there. The eternal presence. Listen again. Will be the eternal presence. Those pitches aren't part of the song, but thinking those pitches and then letting our voice fall apart around each of those pitches is going to be the key. Will be the eternal presence. Hear it? There's barely any of that presence in the back, but I've let myself think those pitches as I abandon into it. If I strip back the control, and I hesitate to use that word control, but the awareness of being able to implement muscle memory, train muscle memory quickly, it would sound like this. The eternal presence! As I can't figure out whether to reach. And sometimes that's a little harder on your voice because I'm not leaning into it, and I'm reaching for it and trying to figure out where to reach and where to lean into the fact that my voice is just cracking anyway and transfer into my head resonance. That's part of the vocal confusion that you're going to experience as you dial this stuff in. But as you get this muscle memory down and you realize that leaning in and keeping the sensations high in your throat is the ticket to embracing the vulnerability that this vocal break presents to you, you can do this stuff more often. This is a prime example of note roasting, as I have talked about in other videos. And there's doubling and stuff going on too to beef up his sound. Will be the eternal presence. Will be the eternal presence. Thanks so much for watching and digging into Matt's style with me. Really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for all of the suggestions for Matt Heafy's vocals. And I love the dialogue too that some of the comments bring in. Like, oh, I was hearing this and I was hearing that in whatever sample that I presented. If you're hearing it a different way or you're hearing a different technique, keep these discussions going. It's all about learning, being didactic, and embracing possibility with what we hear and what we try with our own voices. Again, if you'd like to go deeper with me and do this on a more personalized level with your voice, click that link below and join my free course. We'll see you for more.